Swagatam, welcome. In this video, I share with you my stand regarding the FCRA amendment bill, which has now become quite controversial, politically hot. I was not inclined to do this video, but an individual whom I really value and respect a lot, Dr. Sushil Chandy, who was formerly the director of Christian Medical College, Vellore, shared with me an interview between Arnav Goswami of Republic Television fame and Harish Salve, easily the brightest legal luminary in India, even globally. He wanted my comments on it, and I tried to view that video, fairly lengthy discussion between these two great characters. I have to admit that I discontinued viewing the video after 10-15 minutes and then decided to do this video so that I can share with those who want to understand the Christian perspective, the biblical perspective on an issue like this. So quite obviously, I'm doing this video for a very limited audience. They don't have to be necessarily Christians, but those who want to understand what a spiritual perspective on this contemporary issue could be. So I envisage or I conceive this video in two distinct parts. In the first part, I'll take up for a very brief examination the most objectionable or the most dangerous provision in this proposed bill. In the second part, I provide my overall view of the issues involved in this context. So let's proceed. The first part. The main objection, and this is not just my view alone, by common consent, the main objection to the foreign contribution regulation bill is that it facilitates the takeover of NGO and religious assets by the government without sufficient judicial processes. So, if this bill becomes law through the parliament, when it becomes an act, it will prove a Damocles sword over the heads of the NGOs and particularly the minority religious institutions that are receiving any form of funds, any form of funding from overseas. So this is what is called the executive overreach. So the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act Amendment Bill, as it stands now, is a clear instance of facilitating executive overreach via legislation. And this, I think, is a very serious issue. So let me look into some basic aspects of it. I will not be detailed or comprehensive, but just to get an idea as to what this is about. How does this bill facilitate the executive overreach, which, as I said, could prove the sword of Damocles over the heads of NGOs and religious assets related to foreign funding? Now, this bill provides for the creation of a designated authority which is authorized, now listen very carefully, which is authorized to take over, manage or dispose of foreign funded assets. So there will be a designated authority created by the government to take over, to manage and sell, dispose of the assets of the NGO or the community which has been created through overseas funding. That's the first part. Now, when will the government be able, or under what circumstance will the government or the competent authority appointed by the government be able to step in? And that is also extremely important to notice. If an organization's FCRA certificate is cancelled, or if that NGO or organization surrenders the FCRA certificate, or if the FCRA certificate lapses due to non-renewal. 3 conditions. Imagine an NGO called A. This NGO has been receiving foreign funding over a period of time, let's say 10 years. And out of the foreign funds received, this NGO has created certain assets over the last 10 years. But this particular year, that NGO comes under a cloud, is accused of misusing the funds, and therefore it attracts the provision for the cancellation of the FCRA certificate. And at that point in time, this competent authority can step in, take over not only the assets created this year, but assets created from the beginning. Take over, manage, sell. Now, this is the draconian part of the provision. Here, there are 3 issues which we need to clearly understand. First, an NGO can be robbed of its foreign funds related past assets on account of its present lapses. It may have maintained an absolutely impeccable record for 9 years, but in the 10th year it commits a mistake, and the government gets hold of the NGO, and immediately the competent authority kicks in and the entire assets are taken away from the NGO concerned. It is a well-established principle in law that no law can be applied retroactively. You can create a law today and then make it effective from, say, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, even 1 year ago. Law is always forward-looking in its application, but in this case, it is retroactive. So there, the less than charitable intention of the government in piloting this bill is very, very obvious. Now, this can be done, that is, the competent authority can step in, not only if an NGO is guilty of misdeeds now, but also if you surrender the FCRA account. You say, I don't want it. Now, I have attained self-sufficiency. I don't any longer need any foreign funding. Therefore, this foreign FCRA account is of no use to me. I surrender it. Then immediately, the competent authority will come and take over all your assets. Now, I don't know in which part of the world such a law will stand. Or, you simply don't renew your account, FCRA account, it lapses, and immediately the competent authority comes and hits you on your head with a sledgehammer. Now, clearly, an NGO or a religious organization not renewing its FCRA account is not an offense. It is not an offense under any consideration whatsoever. Still, that NGO, that community will be punished, not only because of what it has failed to do this year, but all that it has done on the strength of foreign funding over the last several years, maybe several decades. Now, this is absolutely horrendous. I have no doubt about it. I don't think such a law exists anywhere else in the world. So, its intention is blatantly dishonorable. At least I am convinced about it. The third point, which I've already mentioned a short while ago, is that the taking over of the assets of the NGO or the community concerned can be done merely through an administrative process without any judicial wisdom, judicial application of mind to it. And therefore, it really activates, or it has a scope of activating indiscriminate administrative action against NGOs and agencies that the government is pleased to dislike. So it can open the floodgates of executive overreach, executive vindictiveness, and so on and so forth. The fourth point I want to make here is that from my point of view, it is important to understand that the state and the operative part of the state is the government. The state is not the same as the government. The state is much more than the government, but the operative part of the state is the government, the executive. Now, all over the world and all through history, the government has the tendency to expand its authority, its domain of control, at the expense of everything else. Now, NGO means non-governmental organization. So, the government can enlarge the scope of its control only at the expense of NGOs. Because the space that is not filled by the government is occupied by the non-governmental organizations, rendering certain kinds of services to the people who are actually neglected by the government because of its policies and priorities. So, through this bill, the present government is trying to colonize what till now has been the NGO space, the non-governmental organization space. And through that, one of the goals certainly is to suppress and eradicate a different point of view, dissent if you like, but even the creation of an alternative vision. So in that sense, it can have very serious consequences for a large number of people. Many people would think that this is a minority religious issue. It is not. The minorities will be affected, no doubt, but I am of the opinion that the real end result victims of this legislation will be the poor, the Dalits, the tribals, the Adivasis, so on and so forth. So that's precisely my reading of the situation. Now this is the first part. Here I conclude the first part. Now I invite you to join with me in entering the second part of our thinking. All that I have said so far, which is critical of the proposed legislation, will not prevent me from looking at certain very important issues that are not being talked about. Certainly they are not being talked about within the Christian community. Attempts are made to activate a sense of insecurity and grievance within the community. Our religious leaders, our Mithrans, etc., very active. They are certainly very worried. And why they have to be so worried, I don't understand. Yes, I do understand. And therefore, as a person who has purchased at a very dear cost the freedom to think independently and think truthfully, I have the following things to say. First, I have extensive experience of the Christian NGO culture in India. Extensive experience of the Christian NGO culture in India. I have no hesitation whatsoever in saying that the NGO culture is seriously corrupt, notoriously corrupt. Please understand that the church is an NGO. So when I say the NGO culture, I also mean the church culture. Now, whether you like it or not, as Christians, whether you like it or not, the fact that the NGO culture is notoriously corrupt is widely known. It's no longer a secret. The society as a whole, particularly non-Christians, know this only too well. And therefore, in the last 30, 40 years, and particularly in the recent years, hostility and resentment towards the Christian community has been intensifying, and the continued reception of overseas funding only adds fuel to the fire. So this is the first point I want to make. We cannot shut our eyes to the fact that the Christian NGO culture is notoriously corrupt and the fact that this is widely known. That's point number one. Point number two. Relative to the Christians in India, this reality, the reality that Christian NGOs are corrupt, fouls the total image of the Indian Christian community, even if the overwhelming majority of Christians in India are not at all involved in this. That is to say, the people who are practicing corruption within the Christian community are a tiny handful. But the bad smell that they create affects every member of the Christian community. This is something that most Christians don't understand, though I've been trying to explain this to my fellow Christians over the last 5-6 years in a very, very concentrated manner. People think that I have some vested interest, some kind of hidden hostility to the church. But the fact is this, please understand that even if you keep your hands clean, the very fact that you belong to this context where a certain number of people who are supposed to be holy men, supposed to be doing wonderful service to society, supposed to be the representatives of Jesus Christ, they are practicing corruption, mega corruption, and the fact that it is widely known, all this is descending on your head like a ton of cow dung. Please understand this. So a tiny chunk in the community is bringing bad name to the entire community. To help us understand, let me use an illustration. That illustration is from a distance so that it's objective. Now even today you know that Germans have not recovered from the sense of guilt that they have acquired on account of the Holocaust. This is what is called collective guilt. The Germans today had nothing to do with it. They are only the descendants of those who perpetrated this atrocity. And there is a beautiful expression for this. It's called participation mystique. Participation mystique. So by virtue of being the descendants of those who practiced or even endorsed the Holocaust, which happened in Germany, the whole of Germany stands discredited. Now, for example, compare Germany and Switzerland. They are very close to each other in Europe. The Swiss had nothing to do with it. But the moment a Swiss steps out of Europe, he will be seen as European. And Germany is identified with Europe. So somehow in a mysterious way, a Swiss gentleman whose forefathers also had nothing to do with the Holocaust, still he feels guilty on account of what happened in Europe because now he is seen as a European. So this European burden of guilt is shared even by the Swiss who had nothing to do with it. And this is not what I am saying, this is what the Europeans themselves are complaining about. And if that is the case, how much more in our case, where we belong directly to a community where its leaders are practicing corruption and mega corruption on account of overseas funding. To give you one example, a former General Secretary of the Church of South India embezzled 7.5 crores from a fund created to help the tsunami victims. It became a case, it was widely known, and the lady concerned came and hid herself in my campus in St. Stephen's College, Delhi, because a colleague of mine was her brother-in-law. I came to know about it and I asked him to kick her out because I cannot harbor criminals and fugitives from the law. So now this is a known case. Now you tell me whether or not the disrepute of it will fall upon me, you and everybody else. I can cite umpteen illustrations, but paucity of time will not allow me to go into further details. After all, today everybody is talking about it, and therefore that makes my work easier. So let's be very clear that you may say that you have nothing to do with it, you keep your hands clean, but the fact of the matter is that there is corruption in our midst, and that is widely known. And when the people outside the community look at it, they see it as you are belonging to a corrupt community. They will not say, well, only a few members who have the opportunity to practice mega corruption are doing it, the rest are all innocent people. They will do nothing of the sort. They will say that he or she belongs to this corrupt community. And therefore, there is very serious public resentment against Christians in India and Christians in Kerala in particular. Let me give you an illustration. Many of you know that I was a member of the National Commission for Minority Education Institutions. The mandate of that commission was to give effect to the full scope of Article 30, Sub-Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, which allows the religious and linguistic minorities to establish and administer institutions of their choice. So, in 2005, I think, if my memory serves me right, when the Marxists were in, the LDF was ruling in Kerala, the then Education Minister M.A. Baby piloted a bill. It was called the Self-Financing Regulation Bill. The idea was that these colleges within the self-financing, professional colleges, in this bracket of self-financing institutions will not have minority rights. My task in the commission was to liaise with all the states and union territories other than Jammu and Kashmir, because in those days Jammu and Kashmir was outside the framework of reference. So I came here. I had a long meeting with M.A. Baby, and I told him that this will not stand legal scrutiny. Then I asked him very politely as to why, in spite of the fact that there is very serious objection from the leaders of religious minorities who have a certain clout in Kerala, he wanted to pursue with this with proposed legislation. He said to me something very interesting. He said that he was not very keen about it, even the government was not particularly keen about it, but SFI was very keen about it because, and this is what you must understand, he said that the SFI realizes that there is very strong resentment towards the Christian community on account of the corruption of Christian educational institutions in Kerala, and therefore if this legislation is persevered with and turned into law, made the law of Kerala, it will help the LDF, the Marxist party in particular, to gain popular support. The party will become more popular. This is a clear illustration of what I am trying to say. My views are based on concrete personal experiences. It is not armchair thinking or theorizing. Please understand. So, the fact of the matter is that there are very serious issues. So, in this context, and please listen carefully, in this context, Christians have two options. Either they can get into this knee-jerk reaction and make a hue and cry against this amendment, and I have very clearly expressed my reservation about this bill. So, we can all come together and protest, make a loud noise. But even if we put up a very stiff resistance, it can pass, it will pass because of the numbers that BJP has in the parliament, both houses of the parliament. The second option before us is to cleanse ourselves spiritually and ethically. And I would consider that to be the right action. Now, if legislations of this kind are proving popular, no politician will come up with a legislation which is bound to be unpopular. This legislation will appeal to a large section of the Hindus in this country. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not at all surprised. Okay? So, please remember, please realize that the Christian community's public image today is really very bad. And no amount of protest will take that away. Now, take the case of the church bill. Should the Christians in Kerala have resisted the church bill instigated by our bishops and their cronies? The church bill is an eminently well-intentioned piece of legislation which only aims at bringing about transparency and accountability in managing the community's resources. By opposing that, we merely exposed ourselves. I think the Christian community did a serious disservice to itself by opposing the church bill, instigated by the bishops, who have many things to hide and whose control over the assets of the community will be weakened, and the members of congregations, various congregations, will be empowered to look after their own assets. I don't think that's a crime. So please understand that there are times when Christians act and react in public in indefensible ways, which is extremely regrettable. And finally, I want to raise a very, very important issue. We are now decades away from our independence. Christian churches in India are rich. The amount of assets that our churches have is actually humongous. Is there really any justification for continuing to rely on overseas funding? Do you really believe that overseas funding is essential to do God's work? If you think so, if you think it is, let me give you two examples. Easily, the best known and most respectable Christian institution in India is Christian Medical College, Vellore. I've had the good fortune of being associated with that institution for 25 long years. What was the origin of that institution? A young lady called Ida Sophia Skadar, who saw the misery of the women in Tindivanam of Tamil Nadu, went and got herself educated medically, came back as a doctor and started working without any funds. All she had in the first year of her work, first several years of her work, was a bullock cart and a hurricane lamp, and an untrained assistant, a domestic hand who also doubled up as a nurse. In the first year of her service, she treated 12,000 patients. She used to conduct wayside surgeries using her bullock cart as the operating theatre. Or let me give you another example. St. Stephen's Hospital, Delhi. It began with a lady, her name was Priscilla Winter, who saw that the burqa-clad women in North Delhi were completely deprived of medical services. So she was not even a trained person, she was not even a nurse, she had no medical training, but she decided to do something about it. She gathered medicines. She had only a wooden box full of medicine. She went and sat under a tree on the banks of river Yamuna. And people used to come to her. And slowly it grew into a small clinic, and today it's one of the major hospitals in the capital of India. Absolutely no foreign funding, especially in the formative, decisive period of that institution. Subsequently, it got some foreign funding, I'm not denying that. Similarly, my own college, St. Stephen's College, at zero foreign funding. So I'm convinced from my experience that foreign funding, overseas funding, is not at all needed to do good work, significant godly work. A great deal can be done without overseas funding. And it's an undeniable fact that wherever there is foreign funding, there is mega corruption. I've said it at the beginning, I'm not going to spend more time on it. Now let me give you another illustration. A few decades ago, 2-3 decades ago, when Dr. J. Jacob was the director of St. Stephen's Hospital, Tea Society, New Delhi, a British member of Parliament visited that hospital. He was a Christian, a practicing, ardent, very sincere Christian, who was also a member of the British Parliament. Now he wanted to study the NGO culture, Christian NGO culture in India. So he visited various Christian NGOs, including, as I said, churches are also NGOs. And when he visited St. Stephen's Hospital and interacted with Dr. Jacob, director of St. Stephen's Hospital, Delhi, he was astonished. He said that the only head of a Christian NGO who was not living like a Raja was Dr. J. Jacob, director, St. Stephen's Hospital, Delhi. I'm quoting the man's words. I think nothing more needs to be said. Now, let me give you my own experience. There is a small institution in Delhi called Theological Research and Communication Institute. In 1989, to be precise, that institution collapsed. And I was approached, and very reluctantly, I took over that institution. When I took over that institution, it was in the red. The person who was serving as the director of Tracy, Theological Research and Communication Institute, ran away from there because he could no longer handle the show. He went to the United States, and that's a story in itself. Now, the first thing I did, and at that time, during all that period, this institution was receiving overseas funding, both from the UK and from the Netherlands. The first thing I did when I took over as the honorary chairman of Tracy, this institution, was to stop all foreign funding. Because in a flash I realized that wherever there is foreign funding, there is corruption. To cut a long story short, I looked after that institution till 2007. In 2007, I became the principal of St. Stephen's College, and I couldn't hold these two positions because I just didn't have the time to do justice to the work in Tracy. By the time I left Tracy, I not only made that institution debt-free, I left behind 37 lakhs. It obviously meant very hard work. But the point I'm making is, you can do God's work without overseas funding. And secondly, you cannot resist corruption if there is overseas funding. Now you tell me whether this FCRA amendment bill is such a big issue or whether we should make it into a big issue. In my opinion, not. I'm totally convinced that if overseas funding is stopped altogether, we shall be better off spiritually, and we will really do God's work as it is meant to be done. To assume that God's work can be done only on the strength of dollar and Deutschmark is stupid to the core, and it is a humbug that's been sold to you. The fact of the matter is that Christianity hinges on just one person called Jesus of Nazareth, whom we have forgotten. What did he say about himself? The foxes have their holes, the birds in the air have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. How much foreign funding did Jesus have? How much funding did Jesus recommend to his disciples to collect? He said, freely you have received, freely give. That is to say, be completely unmindful of any funding. Rise above all material considerations. That's the basic precondition for doing God's work. And therefore, I am totally convinced that this great anxiety that is being spread through the Christian community about this FCRA amendment bill is much ado about nothing. It will certainly affect people who want to have a great time at the expense of the image of the community on the basis of very easy money received from overseas. But as far as the community as a whole is concerned, it is the albatross around our neck. It's a liability. It is something that seriously corrupts our image in public, which is a liability to us if we want to be witnesses to the gospel of Jesus in the Indian context. Thank you. All the best.